Obviously, you're going to find every white nationalist laughable, disgusting, etc. The point of the debate is to flesh.
0% of you are subscribed. Fix that.
What's going on, Vaush?
Not much, just, appreciating the wonderful fruits of cultural diversity. So, how you doing?
I've been all right, Vaush. I've been all right.
What do you have on your mind?
I do think race is obviously real, and I think there's utility in understanding race. It's a biological reality as opposed to just like looking at it as a social construct. We can run experiments to show that race is real. And I thought this was a very interesting example of race realism because, of course, black hair is different than white hair.
Yeah, okay, so nobody is arguing that there aren't phenotypical differences between people of different races. I mean, what makes black people black? Usually their skin's a little darker than mine, huh? Nobody's arguing with that. Like, we know black people don't get sunburned as easily, different hair, so on and so on. The reason why race is a social construct isn't because there are absolutely no physiological differences whatsoever that humans are grouped into. It's because the lines that we draw to distinguish those groups are totally, totally arbitrary, which is the reason why biologists don't use race when they're trying to understand human genealogy or the way in which the human genome has evolved and spread throughout our species. They don't, because to them, race is useless. But, like, let's be real here. When people talk race realism, we're not talking about black people having, like, frizzy hair or whatever. We're usually talking about intelligence. That's usually what people banther around about. And as far as I can tell, there is absolutely no biological evidence, nor any which sort of makes any intuitive sense, to indicate that there would be any genetic differences between the races with regards to intelligence or processing capabilities.
Seem to just diminish or dismiss the fact that there is a racial category. We can group certain ethnicities under a racial category, and then we can draw utility from that.
The point is, again, we're not arguing that there are no physiological differences. It's just that the lines we draw are arbitrary.
Well, they're not. It's kind of like when we mix the color spectrum, right? No. Well, there's certain points where you could say there's a gray area, no pun intended. But let me just further explain.
Where does green end and blue begin?
We know, Vaush, that green and blue exist. So simply because you can point to that perfectly middle area where it starts to get blurry, you now throw the baby out with the bathwater.
We know physiological differences.
And you say green and blue don't exist simply because turquoise exists.
No, we're not saying. Hold on. We're not saying green and blue don't exist. We're saying that the line between them, the line which distinguishes them, is one you have to decide on arbitrarily. We're not, again, like what, I feel like you're attacking a straw man here. Have you ever met a lefty who said there are no physiological differences whatsoever between any racial groups?
You're dismissing the point here. I don't want to get away from this example. You're not necessarily saying there's no such thing as green and blue. What you would be saying is that there's no utility in understanding green and blue because there are these arbitrary lines, because there's this gray area. Now we can't possibly decipher a white person from a black person simply because there's mixing.
Yes,
that is ludicrous. That's like mixing colors and saying you can't determine the original origins.
Wait, hold on. Again, I'm struggling to understand the relevance of this. So if your argument isn't attacking a straw man that lefties don't believe there are any physiological differences between people at all, I'm not entirely sure what it is we're talking about here. If your argument is that the social construct of race provides us some utility, then I would argue, sure, it does. I think it also provides a lot of negative utility, but there are scant instances where being able to snap identify people by racial groups provides us a lot of value. A lot of that is because we already identify people by racial groups, meaning that since we've already embedded these concepts into the collective consciousness, it's easier for us to draw upon them. It's like a stereotype bank that we can pull from, which is sometimes useful, but I think it does a lot of social harm too, you know?
Well, I'm very glad that you admit that there is utility in understanding race. And I think it's very important in highlighting this because if you can make predictions based on something, if you can find usefulness in understanding something, then it is scientific. And of course, you can describe anything as a social construct. For Christ's sakes, a couch is a social construct, but it is a very real thing in reality as well. So I hope you're not trying to play that card like, well, just everything's a social construct.
So what you're doing right now is an enormous Mott and Bailey. So we already know that there are physiological differences between people, and we already know that everyone agrees there are some instances where it's useful to refer to traditionally oriented racial groups. I mean, Everyone does
Great.
this.
That's if
right. Okay, but that's not
there's
race.
actually
Wait,
quite,
that's hold on. Wait. Stop.
Surprised.
That's
Okay,
not
sure,
race
sure.
realism, though. What you're describing is the position held by everyone on Earth.
Yeah. So right now, what you're trying to do is say, well, listen, there are some, frivolous, kind of trivial aspects to race realism that, yes, of course, any fool would acknowledge. But then you, in the same breath, say there are no concrete, objective differences between these two. So of course, you have to rewind that one back.
There can't be, because there are no
concrete
objective racial barriers. So there can't be concrete.
Now we're back to the racial barriers. There are racial barriers.
Are there objective? Wait, hold on.
To the points in which. Okay.
What is the objective racial line between a black and a white person? Is Obama white or black?
Okay, exactly. Now, so you've pointed to turquoise and said, "Is this green or blue?"
Wait, answer
and just
the question.
because you can do that,
answer
doesn't
the
mean
question.
that there isn't white or black.
Answer
I would say
the question.
he's a mix of the two.
We're not arguing again. We're not arguing that there's not white or black. I'm saying that there are no objective divisions. Wait, hold on. I need you to follow through with me here. I need you. Hold on, stop, because this is going to go on for 40 minutes, and we're not going to arrive at any conclusions. Please listen.
If
okay.
There's no.
Wait, stop. Wait, please, my friend. I beg of you, my fellow white. Maybe I don't know. Please, okay. Everybody knows that different racial groups have some differences to them. Obviously, we can see that in skin color. Okay. But that does not mean that these groups are crafted in an objective way. We know they're not, because biologists don't use race. It's a worthless construct to them. They use clients because that's a way better way of describing human genealogical variants. There are black people who are incredibly genetically similar to me, and there are white people who are very genetically dissimilar to me. So none of these lines are going to be objective. None of them can be objective. Any lines we draw trying to objectively determine racial groups are going to fail. It will always be a subjective, muddy social characteristic. Like that follows naturally from the fact that there are black and white people closer to each other genetically than there are white people to white people or black people to black people. There is social utility, but that doesn't speak to reality. Social utility is itself a social construct. So let's get past this largely semantic argument. Do you think there are inherent cultural, behavioral, or racial differences between the racial groups as you see them? Because I think that's what most people mean when they talk about race realism,
There are physical differences between the groups that can be observed in large numbers. They're not going to be observed in every single individual case. There are differences in terms of cognitive performance or mental output, again, which can be observed by looking at large numbers, not just individuals. So obviously, you can have a very intelligent black person and a very unintelligent Asian person, etc. Right? But in large
evidence
numbers,
that those differences are inherent?
Do I have evidence that the differences are inherent?
I mean, of course, Africa's average IQ is going to be lower. You see what we did to that continent for a few hundred years? I mean, obviously, they're going to be behind with education.
You can take somebody who has a raw IQ, let's say, of 90, and you can bump them up to maybe 110, Vaush. But there are certain individuals that can never become Albert Einstein. I would even admit for myself, no matter what you did for me as a child, there are certain limitations within my brain that would prevent me from being Albert Einstein.
So
that doesn't mean
you're
I can't
doing
be
the
an
Martin
amazing
Bailey thing
musician.
again. You're arguing that there are intelligence differences between humans, which we know, we all agree.
Just because education has something to do with it doesn't mean the raw components of the brain.
So I don't know how to explain this to you.
You must concede that genetics plays a role in IQ.
Wait, are you listening to me? When on earth
just
have I ever
to that
said,
point and we can move on.
When have I ever said
to the point,
genetics don't play a role? I've never said, I think I've said the opposite multiple times in this conversation.
No, you've tried to say that it's education.
I've said, hold on, wait, you actually don't know what we're talking about right now. Please, so let me clarify,
no,
okay?
Vaush, I'm completely confused.
At no point have I said genetics don't play an influence in intelligence. I've said the opposite, actually, if you were listening. What I said was IQ tests don't measure inherent intelligence. Those are two different statements. So how do you know that any of the IQ differences in the world right now are inherent?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily be able to determine on every single case the
general,
level of
why do these averages differ?
And the level of the environment. That's like, nature versus nurture is a very interesting question for, all scientists and philosophers, right? Canada has never had slavery, right? We don't have a history of segregation or any of these things. Well, let me finish the point.
I mean, I'm just going to Google while you're saying this. I'm going to Google Canada racial income gap.
Nothing compared to the US, yet we still have the same IQ gap and the same problem with crime. The environmental conditions are vastly different in that they are better suited for blacks in Canada, yet we see the same problem. This is why I'm a white nationalist, because I see the same thing happening in all white countries.
Hold on. The fact that you think that life is easier for black people in Canada tells me everything I need to know about your victim complex. Wait,
of course you're going to
think there was slavery in Canada. Why'd you say otherwise?
No, there actually wasn't, Vaush. Do your research.
We had an underground railroad system. A Wikipedia article entitled "Slavery in Canada."
Come on, Canada does not have the systemic racism problem or slavery or segregation or anything that America went through.
Then it had less.
We don't have a racial problem in Canada. If you come up to Canada and you ask people, is there this huge racial tension? No, they perform poorly because mostly
you're running. We're running 80 miles away from the goalpost. We need to chill. So don't say there was no slavery in Canada when I can Google, did Canada have slaves, and get a yes answer.
It wasn't national. It wasn't like the entire east of Canada had slaves.
That's cool. Slavery wasn't in all of America either. You know, it was mostly...
Well, it was in the entire South, and it was like, come on.
So wait, again... So wait, please. Hold on. Wait, stop, please. Oh my God, we're never going to get anywhere with this. So again, don't say there was no slavery in Canada if there was slavery in Canada.
But let's see the extent to which. How many slaves?
Just Google slavery in Canada. I'm not going to educate you in your own country.
No,
it's Canada. I don't care. I don't care. It's Canada. I don't care. I don't care. It's Canada. I don't care. Please don't make me mute you. We moved so far off that earlier point. Okay. So even here in America, and I can only speak to America because I'm an American, the racial IQ difference between black and white people has been collapsing massively with time, which supports my argument. Unless you think black people are evolving to have big throbbing brains or white people have been drinking too much lead water or something, that seems to be an environmental change. But even in the current state of affairs, the average income gap, the exposure to social stigma of crime, and a bunch of other psychological factors that are associated with being the victims of oppression, these also lead to negative effects on one's performance in an IQ test. That's not just here in America for black people, that's everyone everywhere. So given the fact that we're now down to an 8-point gap with a bunch of systemic problems unaddressed, I feel like the environmentalist argument is growing stronger and stronger every day. The idea that, yeah, there really was no difference in our brains, you know, it's just a matter of making sure we're all treated equally.
Right. Well, here's the thing, Vaush. I've never said that there is no aspect of malleability in terms of intelligence. We can do things as society to elevate a certain group. We do change the genetics. And
Wait, I mean, do you know how any of this works? You can't change genetics in a couple of generations. You do understand that, right? You keep using that term. It doesn't mean what you think it means. The genetics are the DNA code written on the proteins in your cells alter in tiny, indiscernible ways from generation to generation. Evolution is not going to be affected by...
Actually, it does happen within a very short period of time. But I can point to the North Korean and the South Koreans and their height differential and their IQ levels.
That's not... Wait, hold on. Wait, hold on.
No. Sorry, you got to listen to me here,
That's
Vaush.
not evolution.
Because of environmental differences that occurred in North and South Korea.
That's not evolution. That's genetics.
Biological... Dude, it's the same thing.
It's not. Wait, aren't you supposed to be from the superior white race?
In this specific context, it is, and you need to concede to this point.
I'm sorry. I have to ask you. If you have two brothers, they're twin brothers, and one of them you feed a bunch when they grow up, and the other one you starve, and the starved one ends up shorter, did you evolve that other brother to be shorter? Is that what you would say there?
What I would say, if we did this, okay, I'm going to answer your question 100%. If we do this in large numbers, you're affecting the genetics.
Do I evolve when I work out because my muscles are getting bigger?
Listen, yes, you actually do, Vaush.
That's not what evolution means.
See, I didn't want to say yes to that because I knew you would say that. But obviously, we can change our genetics based on the things that we do within our lifetime.
That's not what evolution means. These characteristics won't be passed down to children.
Dude, in order for macroevolution to occur, you need to have successions of microevolution, meaning within any given lifetime, if you were to mate with the average North Korean, I could predict your kids are going to be shorter than if you mated with a South Korean, simply because of my understanding of race, genetics, and how the environment affects biology.
Evolution.
Again,
if you're referring to epigenetic changes, that's not evolution.
It is a form of evolution because if you keep it on that track, you eventually get hobbits and giants, Vaush.
Hold on, wait.
How did we get Chihuahuas and Dobermans? Through constantly micro forms of evolution, taking the smallest.
That doesn't mean
puppies
every
and breeding them
genetic
with other
change
small
to an
puppies, and
individual is
eventually you
evolution.
get a macro evolution with micro evolution.
Okay, wait, hold on. I feel like I'm being irresponsible
basic,
platforming this
I
low
feel like
IQ
this
of an
is just
argument.
basic
Chat,
understanding,
I really
man.
don't want to go over this, but please Google epigenetics and Google evolution, and we can be done with this subject. Why am I
Yeah,
discussing
go for
race
it,
and
Chad.
IQ with a person who doesn't know what the word evolution means?
Very alpha.
Very alpha, yeah.